Christine, welcome to Podcastina.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's
Thank you
exciting.
for being here. I'm so excited to talk about resilience with you. I mean, what a great way to start the year and get
Mhm.
everybody motivated to focus on what matters.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A great topic all year round, but especially in the new year as we are trying to jump in with a fresh start. So,
I really love to sink my teeth into the energy of what feels like a fresh slate. I don't know if most people take New Year's as seriously or if they feel this kind of woo-woo energy around it in the same way that I do, but for me, I get really excited to have a way to kind of organize time. So year creates this organizational pattern where it's like, oh, perfect, I can look over my notes, I can review what I've been up to, and then plan ahead in a way that feels tangible.
mhm.
And I think,
Absolutely.
yeah, resilience is a big, big part of that. So, as the expert on the subject, what is your working definition of resilience?
Yeah, so resilience has a lot of lovely definitions that have, you often hear people kind of throw around that word anytime there's a difficulty or a challenge in the news or in the media or wherever it is. But it's actually a scientifically studied concept that's been studied for at least 50 years or so, and maybe even a little bit earlier than that. And it's a topic that's been talked about, like I said, for millennia, even with philosophers and poets and things like that. But the most important thing for me, just even working in this topic for so many years, is that we don't want to gloss over difficulties and challenges. Oftentimes people think, well, if I'm resilient, that must mean that I've had no challenges, no difficulties, no problems. And that's actually quite the opposite. It's not the absence of difficulty. It's not wearing rose colored glasses and kind of glossing over it, like I said, but it's the conscious choice to experience all of the experiences that we have as humans, all the emotions that go along with them, but to not be consumed by them and instead to thrive despite them. So it's basically the ability to proceed successfully, adjusting our sails, if you will, when there has been threatening or challenging situations around us.
And what would you describe as those threatening and challenging situations? Are they the ones people most commonly think of? Is it like death, breakups, getting fired? What else would you categorize as something that people have to gain resilience over?
Hmm. Yeah, it could be anything that we are struggling with day to day, or it could be something catastrophic, like you're mentioning, somebody passing away, an illness, a financial crisis, any of those major life events, but even transitions that we go through our life that are quite natural. Getting into a relationship, even positive things, having a baby, starting a new job, and getting a promotion. All of those things can require us to have to learn to grow and to adapt and to thrive to that new challenge, but having some sort of stability and kind of having this mental kind of strengths that are kind of evoked by these environmental demands. So it's the optimal coping, the learning of the optimal coping in situations of difficulty or challenge or even transition. And what better way to kind of again talk about that transition than in a new year when we're transitioning from all the things we learned in 24 and all the years before it and moving now fresh into 25.
What's the most inspiring part about this work for you? How did you get into it and keep going?
Yeah, so initially it came from a very personal place when I was very young. When I was 13 years old, my father passed away suddenly from natural causes, completely unexpectedly. In fact, my family and I were on vacation at the time. And obviously, that was a very challenging time, not only losing my beloved dad, but also uh, being a teenager at the time, and that's already challenging enough. And then my mom and I had to move states away from where we were living, where he was working, to a state where we had family nearby us. So I had support. I'm thankful for that support, both from my faith and also from my family and things like that. But of course, it was a difficult time. And then as I approached college, I studied biology initially, but took some psychology classes, which eventually became a minor. And that minor turned into graduate work after that in psychology and specifically in the area of resilience. And again, interestingly enough, I found resilience in my own life that I didn't succumb to the challenges that I was experiencing. And of course, there were many. But at the same time, I was able to kind of recover from that and study this as a concept and learn from it, and then also teach it to others. So, a personal story, but turned into a professional kind of event as well.
What an amazing way to persevere through a personal tragedy and turn it into a way to help others. What's been the most fascinating thing that you've learned about resilience that you think most people don't understand?
Mm-hmm. It is that when we're in the thick of it, when we're in the dark, when things are challenging, we are still building that muscle of resilience. It helps to, try to identify some purpose and meaning out of it, as I did eventually. But that isn't always clear in the beginning, and that's quite okay. It's quite okay for it to not be clear at times of where this is supposed to go and what we're supposed to do. But again, as we are going through this difficult time, we are being challenged. It's really important to be flexible and to assess the difficulty itself, and to look at ways that we can respond correctly to this difficult situation. The American Psychological Association often talks about building connections and building relationships and not to become isolated in these difficult times and to move towards a goal and not to think that this situation is insurmountable. I'm never going to overcome it, but to move towards a goal, and nurture yourself along those lines as well, taking care of yourself at those times and using this as an opportunity of self discovery, and not needing to have all the answers immediately. The answers will come if we just kind of persevere and we keep things in perspective, maintaining a hopeful outlook. All those things are really important to build resilience in this difficult and challenging times.
It's hard to feel like despair is going to end. I think when you're
Mhm.
sitting in the thick of it, it's the hardest to do what you just described of
Mhm.
seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, if you will.
Mhm. Absolutely. It is very difficult. And again, that's why it's important to keep things into perspective and to recognize that the hard times and even sometimes the good times don't last forever. Nothing kind of stays the same forever. It changes, it evolves. We evolve. And part of that is sometimes having to grieve the old times, the difficult times, the challenging times, to grieve through that period, to go through that period of struggle, and to understand that, it is okay to grieve. But with that, sometimes comes also acceptance, learning, growth, flexibility, perseverance. And in that, we grow and we walk towards a resilience. Resilience is a muscle to build over time. And so, therefore, it's not something that we just wake up one morning and suddenly we're resilient. It takes a lot of hard work, just like building actual physical muscle takes a lot of hard work. But with that comes the ability to learn and to grow and to thrive.
So people can become better at resilience over time. The more you go through something, even though that something might be changing and evolving, it
Mm-hmm.
is possible to build resilience and get better at quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote bouncing back from things.
Yes, absolutely. It's the ability to kind of build that muscle is to focus on other times in your life where you have been resilient, other challenges that you have walked through and have come out of them. What tools did you use? Did you use your faith? Did you use your family? Did you mobilize resources? That's another big one. Can't do everything by yourself. So it's the ability to kind of mobilize resources around you and also to focus on your own personal strengths, because everybody has different strengths that they can utilize and tap into that can help them to overcome those challenges. But it's having this curiosity almost to look at that situation and to see where again can I look for discovery of new things in that challenge that will help me to grow and help me to identify ways to get out of this difficulty. How can I adapt?
Adapting can feel really full of friction, I think, sometimes, especially when we're like dreading a situation, right? We know something's going to come up in the future, whether you know you have a job loss coming up or whether you see the
Mm-hmm.
pending ending of some kind of relationship. Do we
Mm-hmm.
hurt ourselves extra when we call it like future tripping in 12-step program. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so if you're always focusing just on the future and things that we can't control, that is something that maybe even clinically people can look at with a therapist or things like that, because we can't control the future, right? In some cases, we are always anticipating, and if you're saying things like, I'm anticipating the end of a job or I'm anticipating the end of a relationship, sometimes our mind likes to kind of overthink things because it thinks if I do that, then I will prepare for that future event and know how to handle it when it comes. And in some cases, that's okay, but we also don't want to live so much in the future or so much in the past that we're neglecting acting in the present. So if you're anticipating a job loss, obviously that is a major life event that can impact your finances, can impact your livelihood, can impact how you pay your bills, can impact your family. And so if you're anticipating a job loss, yeah, by all means, get yourself prepared to look for other work, again, to mobilize resources, to tap into connections that you may have. And those are good proactive steps. But if we're just sitting kind of in our head and worried about this job loss, and not actually acting, that is where things can become problematic. So resilience is also about action, an actionable thing. What am I doing to act and in order to adapt to this new situation? So, like I said, if it's a potential job loss, am I looking for new work? Am I tapping into connections? Am I doing things to bolster my resume and help myself in that regard? Then yes, I'm being resilient. I'm learning to adapt. I'm not wallowing in this, and of course, we're going to grieve the job loss. I'm not saying don't be human about it either. Of course, we're going to grieve it. But then after we've grieved it, what are the actionable items that we're going to get to in order to be able to find new work? So that's a great example because, lots of people are kind of losing their jobs, especially towards the end of the year and the beginning of a new one. But again, how do I kind of hone in on my skills and my talents in order to be able to meet this challenge that is coming up ahead? But not living too much in the future, not living too much in the past, being actionable in the present.
Every Buddhist teaching and everything always comes down to being in the present, but man,
Yeah.
is it so much easier said than done. What do you recommend for that? Are you like pro meditating or do you have tools to keep people in the right here, right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's really good to meditation, obviously, is something that's really helpful for a lot of folks, to be present. But also, what am I doing in this moment? Even the smallest baby step to help myself to get out of this situation. So maybe just in the next hour, I will look for one job that will help me to kind of get an idea of what's out there. What can I look for? What skills do I need to kind of tailor? So even staying in the micro moment, even in the next 5 minutes or in the next 10 minutes, if that can help move me forward, in baby steps, that of course will definitely help me as well, because I can't always, again, predict the future. So, what can I do in this moment to help this situation?
I love that. That's a very digestible way of
Hmm.
examining it.
Hmm.
Can you talk to me about what does science tell us about resilience, about its connection to our nervous system?
Hmm. Yeah, so our nervous system is there to kind of alert us when things are stressful around us. It's meant to keep us, awake and alert and keep us away from danger and difficult situations. And resilience is actually kind of the ability to regulate that a little bit. It's how do we recover from that stressful or traumatic situation, and challenge ourselves by, again, adapting, by being flexible, by being creative, by responding rather than being overwhelmed. So our body does not like us to be in this overwhelmed state all the time. And so there is actually a system in the body called the parasympathetic nervous system that will help return us back to what is called homeostasis or balance, in our body. Our body does not like to be in that agitated state for too long. It's not healthy physically or mentally. And so our body has a regulatory system to kind of bring us back from that um, abnormal, agitated, heightened state of awareness back into homeostasis. And so being resilient helps us to kind of, again, problem solve and to find solutions and to bring that parasympathetic nervous system back online to help us to kind of regulate that nervous system into a place where we're kind of regulated, and it's the ability to regulate our system well. And oftentimes when we talk about resilience, we talk about bouncing back, right? I used to think that way, and now I think it's you're not going back, you're actually moving forward to a whole different mindset and state of mind where you're um, able to again adapt to the difficulty that you're in. So it's the ability to regulate your nervous system.
So should we be removing the bouncing back language and sort of, using moving forward as a way to talk about getting past traumas?
Yeah, I mean, I think that traumas and challenges and difficulties do change us. They actually can change your mind, your brain, your mind, how you think, your brain almost anatomically as well. But also, you're not going to go back to the exact same way that things were before. There's a lovely kind of art form out of Japan where they will take an item that is broken, like say a pottery or a vase or a jar or something, and you think, okay, it's broken. Let me just throw it away and replace it or whatever it is. But they will repair it with gold. So it doesn't go back to the way that it was before. Their idea is that with the gold, you become more valuable, more precious, more beautiful even than it was before it was broken because it was repaired with gold. And so that's kind of how I like to look at resilience is the way that you were before is different than the way that you are going to be moving forward, and different than how you're going to look at things and the growth that you've experienced. You may even come back stronger. Um, so it is an ability to kind of move forward in a flexible kind of way.
So if we're working that resilience muscle, building it over time,
Hmm.
implementing the tools, which we'll get into,
Hmm.
is that going to help override that fight or flight that people tend to go into? Or because I don't think and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's possible to just, be so zen and so resilient that you never experience fight or flight, right? But for me, as I've worked on myself, I've noticed it's kind of that ability to come back to homeostasis, as you're saying, that's gotten a little bit quicker for me, but I
Hmm.
don't know that I'm ever going to fully override it because I still find myself in this sort of panicked fight or flight state in
Hmm.
the instance that something is happening.
Hmm. Yeah, I like the word maybe quicker or maybe even more efficiently, as opposed to getting rid of it completely. It is there for a reason. So if you're driving your car and somebody kind of cuts right in front of you, you need to be able to react to that. Or if you touch a hot pot, for example, or a hot stove, you need to be able to remove your hands quickly so your hands don't burn. Um, but the ability to be more efficient about that, that I've gone through struggle and I've come through it okay, and I know that I can do that and again regulate myself in a more efficient way, that is also adaptive. If you get rid of it completely, you may, pain is an important component because, like I said, if you're touching a hot stove or a car jumps in front of you, you need to be able to react. So you don't want to get rid of it completely, but it's because it alerts you to dangers around you. It's a kind of an instinct, but it alerts you to things that are problematic. But how you respond to it is what is really important. We're not going to get rid of challenges and problems and difficulties completely, unfortunately. That's just the nature of life and being human in this world. But how do you respond to it is what is important. That is what's important.
How do we create our own resilience? If someone doesn't have it at all, or maybe isn't
Mhm.
very good at it and they know that,
Mhm.
where does somebody start in building that?
Yeah, so understanding your own character strengths. We've kind of been, I mentioned that a little bit ago, but knowing that you have your own characteristics. Research tells us that we found these 24 characteristics that are inside of us, that are kind of morality based. So they're very rarely wasted and they're very easy to generalize across situations and time. But they contribute to a good fulfillment in our life and ourselves and how we interact with others. And we have these 24 character strengths inside of us that kind of regulate and determine our behaviors, our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. So, one way is determining these. where we are in terms of those 24 character strengths, where they are, how we use them, how we apply them in our everyday lives, in what areas do we apply them, but also how we can be, competent in certain situations as well. That's really, really important. Again, flexibility is really, really important. How do we assess this problem? Do we see it as insurmountable, or do we see it as I can look at things and be hopeful? Do I look at things in terms of a despair kind of situation, or do I look at it like a challenge? If it's a challenge, then I can, have commitment to applying these strengths that I have to help me to kind of overcome those situations. We also want to have this certain kind of confidence, that we can overcome and to connect with others to help us. We don't have to do it by ourselves. There's often the saying that it takes a village to raise a child. I think it takes a village to raise everybody. We all need a village. And when things are difficult, we tend to isolate and go into our little cocoons and run away from people. But we need to connect and see how others can contribute to our lives, and having this sense of control. I can have control over this situation. It seems difficult right now, but I'm going to take it again step by step until I get out of this difficulty.
I printed actually these 24 characteristics because I just think this is so fascinating and I hadn't
Mhm.
heard about it yet. And I'll go ahead and publish where I found it in the show notes so everybody else can look at it. So I
Mhm.
just wanted to read a couple of these off and see, because I think you mentioned when we spoke before we recorded that
Mhm.
most people have 3 to 5 of these. So I would love to get into identifying them, but let's see. There's like these 6 subcategories:
Yes.
humanity, justice,
Mhm.
temperance, transcendence, wisdom and knowledge is one, and courage. So if you
Yeah.
take like the courage circle and that's what you go to, it's being brave, perseverance, integrity, enthusiasm. So how do people know which of these character strengths are within them? Is there a way to identify like what's our go-to?
Mhm. So there's been decades of research on this, and the interesting thing is that we have all 24 kind of housed inside of us.
Mm.
We usually think of a tool belt, right? Your tool belt or your tool kit has tons of tools in it, right? And you may have the entire toolkit, and other people may have the entire toolkit, but you have 3 or 5 tools in that toolkit that are your favorite, right? You use the screwdriver the most or the hammer the most, but you don't necessarily use a hammer or a screwdriver for everything. So we do lean on the other ones, all the tools in the tool belt, if you will. But we tend to lean on some of these a little bit more than some of the other. These are the positive traits of our personality that have been found universally. So universally, we all want hope. We all want love. We all want gratitude. We all want leadership. But your 3 or 5 top ones are the ones that you're going to lean on the most, even though you have all 24. So these are character strengths or positive traits of your personality that you present at times of excellence. And oftentimes we will focus on the things that are going wrong with us and not the things that are going well. And even when we're raising up kids, because I've mentioned kids a little bit, we want to focus on their strengths, not just all the things that they're doing wrong per se. So imagine if you brought home, 5 A's and 1 F, unfortunately. Most people will focus on that F and say, oh my goodness, I got an F. That's so terrible. And while it is, it's not great. How did you get those 4 A's? What did you do to bring those 4 A's home? You must have studied or talked to your teachers. And so it's that kind of perspective that we need to have. How did I succeed in other areas? What tools did I apply? Which of those character strengths did I apply? And then how can I use that to turn around the areas that are not as good? So, again, there's a way to kind of measure that. There's a website that will measure your character strengths. I often work with clients to help them to not only identify their strengths, but also how to utilize them specifically in their specific life. But you're looking for these ultimate paths to virtue. And like you said, there are 6 categories in which all 24 of these kind of fall in. And it's not even, it's not 4 per each of those 6 categories. Some have 3, some have 5. But ultimately, the 6 categories, like you mentioned, are wisdom. This is a strength where we acquire a lot of good knowledge through creativity and good discernment. Courage is this ability to kind of face opposition head on whether that's internal, your internal thoughts, or external, could be difficult people in your life. The next one is humanity, and that tends to how do you give love or befriend others, and how do you accept that from other people. You also have justice, again, the ability to discern and have a healthy community. Temperance, which is preventing against excess and having, just the things that we need. And then finally, the sixth category is transcendence, the ability to look at the larger universe and to provide meaning and hope and humor. And that's the spirituality and beauty and excellence kind of category as well.
Can people move through the different categories if, say, they've been stuck on a certain handful of these characteristics and maybe those aren't helping anymore and it's time for a refresh? Can someone move around the circle and really harness other parts of this?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, ultimately the goal is to grow as many of these as possible. Again, we usually have our go-to tools that we use, but like I said, a screwdriver doesn't work in every instance. A hammer doesn't work in every instance. We need other tools. And so yes, we can build those tools, all 24 of those, and even beyond the ones that we lean on the most. The more that we build these, the happier and more productive we will be, and the more that we can have these positive traits show up in our life in different areas and different arenas.
I was looking at this through the lens of myself and how I deal with things, and I tend to fall in that knowledge and wisdom category, which my therapist lovingly points out as me intellectualizing my feelings versus actually
Mm-hmm.
feeling them. So,
Mm-hmm.
how does someone know that it's time to maybe find some new tools?
Yeah. So again, if you're getting stuck, like you used that word a little bit before, I've gotten stuck in some area in my life. I can't seem to get out of this relationship or this job or this situation that I'm in. It is probably time to kind of sharpen some of those other tools that we have, because we have an unlimited kind of repertoire that we can pull from. And again, if we don't have them all, that's okay. We can mobilize resources from other places. We can get a mentor, or we can get a friend or a family member to help us, a therapist, like you said, a coach of some sort that can help us to kind of move through those situations and not get stuck. But oftentimes we do get stuck because stuck means we are comfortable in the familiar. The familiar feels good. Even if it is not what's best for us, it is familiar. And so I'm going to stay there because, the devil I know is better than the devil I don't know, like the saying goes. And so I don't want to jump into something new because it could be scary, or it could not work out. But the only way to get unstuck is to jump outside of our comfort zone, even a tiny bit.
What's some advice you would give? Because I think everybody knows someone in their life, and maybe it's us, right? Maybe we don't know, but what advice do you give to someone who has a tendency to wallow?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, that's probably wallowing in the past that was comfortable, as opposed to looking to the future that is unknown and probably uncomfortable. And so again, that's where that all that mental chatter is. What if I do this? And what if this happens? And all this that prevents us from kind of moving forward in another direction. So it is important to grieve. It is important to grieve. And grief, people often think about it as grief is for a loss of a job, or a loss of a loved one, or someone passed away. But grief is anytime there is a change in trajectory. Because I have to adapt to this new situation, I have to figure it out. It is unfamiliar. I don't know where I'm going. It's dark. I don't know what's happening. And so that is that uncomfortable feeling keeps us in that wallowing because you're reminiscing about something that you know well. But again, it's important to take small baby steps to move forward. Yes, it's okay to grieve, and there are stages of grief, as we probably have heard of, anywhere from denial to anger to bargaining to depression. But ultimately, there's acceptance. This has happened, and I can choose to sit in this spot and wallow about it forever, or I can take small steps every day and move towards progress and move towards a different situation. And again, that doesn't mean that it minimizes those things that have happened that caused grief. We can't take those away. It's not putting on rose colored glasses or brushing this problem under the rug like it didn't happen. It did happen. But again, where is the growth? Where can I develop from this, with supportive friends, with supportive others, and again, through meaningful activities.
Do you think there's people that enjoy wallowing? And if so, how can the people in their lives snap them out of it or maybe, like help them find a different trajectory?
Yeah. And again, part of the wallowing is staying in that comfortable, familiar place as opposed to going somewhere new that is unknown. And so, if you have a loved one that is in this and they're deep in this and they're really struggling, therapy may help them to kind of change some of the thinking patterns that they're having, or even a coach to help them to see that this problem is not insurmountable. That yes, it is okay to grieve, and one of the most wonderful things about resilience is the ability to hold both simultaneously. You can hold both the grief and the hope for the future. And the hope for the future often involves action, not just a daydreaming kind of thing. I hope it's going to get better. I hope it's going to get better. But to actually take actionable steps to make it better. Whether again that's taking a class, looking for a job, updating your resume, putting yourself out there and finding another relationship. So again, you can grieve and you can move forward at the same time, and one does not negate the other.
And similarly to that, the exact opposite end of that would be someone who's, I've been hearing the term toxic positivity recently,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
that's maybe just a denial of the grief or a
Yes.
suppression of the grief. So is
Yep.
that equally as damaging?
It is equally as damaging because, again, like you were mentioning a few minutes ago, you're not feeling. You're just, okay, let me brush this aside and I'm going to move forward. I'm going to brush this aside. Everything is wonderful. Everything is always rainbows and puppies and life is good. It's not. Sometimes it's not. It's not good. If you've lost a loved one, if you've lost your job and you don't know where to get another one, those things are devastating. And it's okay to say it is devastating. But again, it is devastating. But what action am I going to take to help myself to move forward? Again, when I lost my dad, that wasn't pleasant. That wasn't pleasant for years. It's still not pleasant. And it's been decades now, and it's still not pleasant. But again, what is the meaning and the purpose that can be found out of this difficult situation? What are the opportunities to look for self discovery, to grow, to develop, to have a hopeful outlook? It doesn't negate the difficult situation at all, and it doesn't mean we forget about it. It just means, how do I put one foot in front of the other and have a hopeful outlook?
Mhm. I grew up in this culture where it was survival first, right? And
Mhm.
so any kind of negative feelings, pausing to sit in grief, pausing to sit in sadness, even crying. I just remember being told, hey, don't cry, it's not worth it. Because that somehow is more like the message I was being sent was that the crying and the sitting in it was like damaging to my nervous system somehow, which I
Mhm.
also think wasn't the answer.
Mhm.
And so I guess what I'm getting at with sharing that is what's like oh, sorry, my dog's barking. What's like the productive way of grieving where it's like, no, I don't think
Mhm.
I'm damaging my nervous system. I think I'm actually trying to go through something instead of
Mhm.
suppressing it.
Yes. And that's the perfect way to say it, is how do I go through something? Because we find if you're not going through it, and again, you're trying to circumvent it in some way, I'm going to go over it or under it or brush it under the rug, it comes back out in some other way. Even in health things, right? It can come back out in healthy things because it has not been dealt with and that you did go through it. There is some research on a word called savoring, which means to actually sit with it, to slow down and to process this situation. Even for good things, even enjoying a cup of coffee with a friend and not rushing through it, or even if you're having your coffee by yourself, not rushing through it, but to sit and savor that experience, maybe even visualizing it or journaling about it, sharing it with somebody else, deepening the moment and saying, what using your actual senses, your sight, your hearing, your smell. What am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I smelling? What am I tasting? Those kinds of things to help you to sit and process and savor those moments. You were talking about meditation earlier, and that's kind of what helps with that. And in this savoring, you're able to kind of bank those positive experiences in your mind, to withdraw from later on in an experience which is not as pleasant. And you're pulling back out those positive experiences that you had in those moments of savoring. And also through savoring, you are learning something. So when I'm slowing down and I'm really deepening and sitting with that moment, what am I learning about this moment? What am I learning about myself? What am I learning about my strengths? What am I learning about what I can tolerate and persevere in? What am I learning about what I need to let go? I can't do that if I'm rushing. So it is really important in our microwave society, everything has to be hot and fresh and now, to really slow down and have a gourmet meal every once in a while and just sit and process. And that's okay because it helps us to learn from the moment and a lot about ourselves as well.
Yeah, I love that you said letting go. I want to kind of examine the difference a little bit in
Mm-hmm.
holding on versus letting go. How do you
Yeah.
know when to let go?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when something is no longer serving you well in that way, and if you used the word toxic positivity earlier, and that's a word that's also kind of thrown about, but it's not helping me in any way. It's not helping me to grow. I've become stagnant. Um, and that doesn't mean that you let go of everything and just throw in the towel, not to succumb. That's not the answer either. But how do I pivot? How do I turn this into something else? I recently had talked to a client who had lost their job after 25 something years. And she was saying how devastating it was to have given all her youth and her loyalty to this company that just discarded her after 25 years. So she had a lot of grief, a lot of loyalty issues in this situation, dealing and processing with a lot of stuff. And she sat with that for about a month or maybe even 5 or 6 weeks, and then said, "Hey, wait a minute." There was like a light bulb moment where she said, I've contributed a lot. I know a lot. Why don't I just start a consulting company? And she did. And within a year of starting that consulting company, she truly thrived because she had given all of her expertise and put it towards her own consulting work after that. And so she pivoted. She didn't let it go completely and threw away all her experience and, all of her love for her profession. She turned it into something else. So that's ultimately what resilience is about: adaptability, flexibility, learning, pivoting, and growing.
It's incredible to hear it in the context of a job loss. In the case of, let's say, a loved one passes, I think sometimes what happens when we start to feel the resilience or start to feel moving on, oddly enough, there's like a guilt that comes, and
Mm-hmm.
then the guilt tends to sit in the way of the resilience. How does someone grapple with that guilt of, oh my God, I'm laughing for the first time and my loved one isn't here anymore. Now I feel bad for feeling joy.
Mm-hmm. And again, I would say go back to that holding both at the same time. You are never going to forget your loved one. They have impacted your life. They were a significant figure in your life, or else you wouldn't grieve so deeply. Even when there's unresolved issues and people grieve those unresolved issues, um, how did this person impact your life, and how can I use that in my life moving forward? It's not about forgetting. It's again holding both simultaneously, and you're not forgetting them by laughing or by contributing to the rest of society and the rest of the world by continuing to live. You're actually honoring their life even more. And again, even if it's unresolved issues, what would you say to that person? Could you write them a letter? Obviously they're not going to read the letter, but the letter is for you. Journal about it. What have you learned about yourself through this unresolved experience? And those things are really important as well, because again, it helps you to learn a lot about yourself and to be able to hold the grief and the progress simultaneously.
What's been a resource for you, teachers, books, places that you go to kind of sharpen these tools?
Yeah, there's a lot of research on positive psychology, positive emotions, hope, from a lot of different positive psychology researchers, and a lot of researchers on resilience as well. And those are the key literature that I will read both in regular bookstores, that you can find, but also in the scientific literature. There are significant figures that will help you to kind of learn more about those positive psychology topics. And there's lots of positive psychology topics. Like I said, happiness. There's lots of research now on unshakable happiness and joy. that is not necessarily tethered to a circumstance. I don't have to, win a brand new car to become joyful. Joy is irregardless of the circumstances that you're in. And so, any kind of positive psychology research, there's lots of researchers out there that are important and can speak to the specific research. I don't know if you need me to name specific names, but
If
um,
there's any that you're like, oh, this is one that profoundly changed my outlook, or this is a book that I keep coming back to.
yeah, so there's a book called The Hope Circuit. There's a lot of hope research by Martin Seligman. George Bonanno is a big name in resilience. I've done resilience research as well. Barbara Fredrickson has a lot of work on positive emotions and love. Obviously, a big name in the vulnerability research, but the vulnerability research kind of is older, but it's still very necessary. Brene Brown did a lot of research on the power of vulnerability. But positive psychology in general is a growing field because we're not just focusing on the problems or the diagnoses or the challenges, although those are important and the clinical aspects of those are very, very important, but also what helps people to thrive. And the field of positive psychology is always looking at how do we get people to thrive? Individuals, communities, groups, employers, employees, families, parents, couples, whatever.
Is there anything in your research that you've stumbled upon that's been shocking?
Shocking. Um, just the ability to kind of have resilience on all fronts. That's what's, I think, really, really cool about this field. Um, and people even find, even in difficult times, humor and song and art are ways to kind of cope with challenges and difficulties. So, what I like to say is that humans are multifaceted, right? The problems that we encounter are multifaceted. The impact of those problems on the human psyche is multifaceted. And so our resilience, likewise, is multifaceted. It is physical, it is mental, it is social, it is spiritual, it is artistic, it is on all fronts because humans are very complex and our resilience is likewise very complex.
And I guess almost the opposite of that question would be through your research, what do you find is a blind spot for resilience? What are people neglecting to look at that's keeping them stuck?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of definitions of resilience, and that's been kind of the struggle a little bit is how do you define it? And that's why, in my personal definition that I kind of started with, is that it's you experience the full spectrum of human emotions and you thrive despite the challenges and the difficulties. It's not like you're skipping over things. So even in those moments when you are stuck, what are you learning about yourself? And oftentimes we're just saying, I'm stuck. But why am I stuck? Because it's comfortable, because it's familiar, because it's hard to change. And so all of those things give me information as well.
Have I missed anything with my questions that you feel like people need to know on this subject?
No, I think you covered a lot in the last hour or so. And again, how do I know when to let go and when to keep going? Um, it's really important to again to learn how to pivot. There are times where it is okay to let go, like the example I gave of the person that lost their job after 20 years. Yes, it is upsetting. It is okay to grieve. But again, how do I shift? How do I grow? How do I do something different, even if it's along the same lines, so I don't get stuck in that same situation? Again, the great thing about resilience, you can apply it to relationships, to your work, to your parenting, to your looking for meaning and purpose, to regulating your nervous system, to the many areas that we need to keep regulated occupationally and spiritually and socially and financially and in all these areas to help us to be, again, the best multifaceted humans we can be.
That's beautiful. I really appreciate that you came to talk to me today on this topic and all of the research you're doing. It's really a big value add to people as they go into the new year and come across challenges because life is always going to have these challenges, right? We're always going to have something that we're going to have to find resilience to overcome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The challenges are going to come, but we can face them head on, sit with them, learn from them, and then grow and be resilient and thrive.
Incredible. Christina Gaibe, where can people find your work? How do they get in touch with you if they want to work your program?
Yeah, so I have a resilience website. It's the Center for Authentic Resilient Empowerment. The website is my initials, CA resilience.com. Or if you want to pronounce it all together, careresilience.com. CA resilience.com.
Incredible. And I will plug all of that in the show notes so people can go to it directly from this episode. And
Thank
thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was wonderful. Happy New Year to all of the listeners and to you. And may we go forth and be resilient.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thanks everybody for listening.
Thank
Bye.
you.